Hello, this is Jerome from the Barbarian, Philosopher podcast. Please enjoy this short clip from episode number 9. To stay up to date with more content on MMA, personal development, and current events, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Also, leave us a comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts on The Way of Men if you've read it, or what books you'd like to see us review next. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
We recently read the book The Way of Men by Jack Donovan.
Yes, we did.
And I wanted to kind of do a short book review or just kind of get your take on it. And I found that to be a very interesting book.
Yeah.
One I would definitely suggest.
Yeah.
So essentially, for those who are not familiar with the book, the premise of it, if I guess you had to give like a synopsis, is Jack Donovan poses the question throughout the book, what makes men manly? What are the attributes of masculinity that are universal? So whether you're, some random tribe in the middle of the forest, or you're a dude, in a skyscraper in New York, or you're some, goat herder, wherever the fuck they're herding goats at, what are the universal traits of masculinity? What makes a man manly? And furthermore, what is the difference between being good at being a man and being a good man? And I don't think that's a differentiation that gets made very much in this day and time.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, I agree with his central premise. That dichotomy is an interesting one, and it's something that is worth looking at. And I enjoyed kind of looking at the differences, like you said, between being a good man and being good at being a man.
Mm-hmm.
And good is kind of a loaded term, but when you say good at being a man, it sounds a bit more specific. A good man is, that's open to interpretation. What does a good man mean? It has all sorts of connotations. And there's two different types of good. There's good in terms of competency, if you're good at something, if you're good at fixing, dishwashers or whatever, that's one thing. But then there's the moral good.
Right.
And that's a very, very loaded term. And I think is also the idea of morality and being a good person or a good man versus a bad person or a bad man is something that people, whether it was set up this way or not, I don't think society set it up this way, but it's something that people can use. This is going to sound really cynical, but I think people can use to almost manipulate and influence people.
Right.
And I don't disagree with him. I think he kind of goes along this path where he says that whole concept is kind of loaded to have men actually be less manly.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of introduce a new standard for what is good, what a good man is, and make it the moral man, the nice man, the person who sacrifices himself for other people and is generous and is kind and so on and so forth. Whilst, again, I'm not saying that these are the traits that you shouldn't exhibit at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that at all. But the whole concept of it as being more important than being good at being a man is something that is consciously or otherwise used to make men behave a certain way,
right,
which is kind of convenient for certain people, with certain interests.
Yeah, I think so. He has a couple. For sure, it's a what's a controversial book. I would say that some of the ideas, given the political atmosphere right now, are controversial. But one of the statements that he makes is he says, the way of men is the way of the gang, right? And the gang is always a small group of people. And as a gang or a group expands larger and larger and larger, the ties start to diminish, right? And the influence of those ties start to diminish. I don't think you can have that way of the gang mentality function efficiently in this kind of a large-scale metropolitan setup.
I agree. I was thinking that throughout the book. I was thinking, okay, this is nice, and it's true. Like, there is a strong, deep-seated need to function as part of a gang for men, and historically speaking, men have operated that way as part of a gang, whether we call it a gang or a social group or a nation. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but we identify with other, generally men, and then we operate in that way, and we compete with other gangs. But where he lost me was what he wanted to do with that information. Yes, men have historically functioned as part of a gang, and competed with other men and tried to dominate. Right? That is how we have been through most of history. And until recently, that was acceptable, and now it's becoming less and less socially acceptable. And it is, you could say that there's a crisis in the male world now because of that, in the Western male world anyway. Once you hit a certain age, that's no longer, the way you're allowed to do things.
Right.
But what did he want to do with that?
Yeah, he has a chapter in there which he calls the Bonobo Masturbation Society. And he's essentially getting at what you're saying here, which is because of the way things are set up now, in order for these, he breaks down masculinity into essentially 4 constructs. It was strength, honor, courage, and mastery, right? And in order for those, he says, to really carry any weight, you have to need them. They have to be like an actual life or death requirement. And because things are as comfortable as they are, and there really are very little life or death requirements at this point in our evolution or in our history as a species, anything that we do is we're kind of just jacking off. It's a masturbation of whatever the concepts of masculinity are.
Tattoos and the beards that everyone's got. I know you got one yourself. But the working out and getting really, really big and really strong and deadlifting 600 pounds despite the fact that it's fucking your back up and you walk like an old man. These elements of society, which are super, super common across, and it's not just in the States. I've seen it in England. It's like that too. England, it's becoming more and more like that too. There's this kind of hyper masculinity, and it's just not. Ultimately, if you look at it, it's really not that necessary. So it's kind of a different thing than if a Viking in 850 started getting tattoos and was trying to, it would be a different thing.
Right.
The necessity is just not there. And you just have to call that out. You just have to be honest about that and say, well, fuck it, I want to do it anyway. I still want to get really, really big. I still want to deadlift 600 pounds. I still want to get a sleeve all down my hands, despite the fact that I, work on Wall Street or I'm a lawyer or something, Like, these elements, that's the paradox of modern living. And personally, I think it's easier if you just roll with it.
Yeah, here's where I see the value of what he had to say in the book. I think there's a lot of kind of down-putting masculinity, right? So if a man engages in masculine behavior as this is like, in other words, if you are a man who is overtly being quote-unquote manly, that's kind of told to like shush down, right? And I think we are wired in a way that despite the lack of necessity, despite the fact that it is not politically correct or politically in vogue to say that men should behave as men, we are wired to do so. You don't have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years of half of the species going out and doing certain things, and we don't develop a certain inclination towards that type of behavior, an inclination towards certain stimulus and certain types of interactions, and at least acknowledging what these things are, why they are, and the fact that they are an inseparable part of masculinity gives things some context and removes some of that kind of public shaming of masculinity. I think it is important, even if it is just masturbatory, it is important to find ways to incorporate those inclinations into one's daily life. It's like a certain breeds of dog, for example. You have some, super active dog that's usually like out sheep herding and shit. They're bred to run around and chase sheep. Okay, you live in the city with your sheep herding dog. he still needs to fucking go run and do shit. So maybe you don't have sheep for him to herd, but in order to keep him kind of stable, you're going to have to go run the park with this thing, once or twice a day. You're going to have to find some kind of outlet for that. Otherwise, it's going to manifest itself in less than healthy ways.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of the behavior that we see today in young men, whether it's kind of a general apathy towards society, a lot of different like pent up aggressions and things. It's really coming from not having certain parts of their innate personality being stimulated and given an outlet for.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and it made me think about kind of form versus function, and like if you're just truthful about it, yeah, these elements do exist to men, like the need to compete and the need to have a pecking order and try and get up top on the pecking order. I think if you that's why I say you should just roll with it, because I think society does try to some degree to incorporate those things. I'm thinking about fitness actually, and that's probably because I'm in the fitness world. But there is a lot of that. There is a lot like CrossFit. There's that competitive spirit, that competitive element. There is everyone doing MMA or watching MMA or what have you. Like there's still elements of masculinity, like where it's acceptable to be masculine. But like we just have to be honest and say, look, we're not going to take it back. We're not going to go reverse our evolution 500 years to make those elements of masculinity important.
Right.
We're not going to make it so that you have to fight to the death.
Right. Right.
Like he goes pretty far. I personally think he goes pretty far. Like he starts to kind of lead the door. Like if someone reads this book without their own kind of questioning mind, you know, especially someone young or someone who's kind of looking for an excuse, you could use this type of philosophy to, and this is just my opinion, to justify all sorts of shit that people want to do, but just you shouldn't do it.
Right.
And I did have a point, but look, like art, right? Is there a point to art? Is there a real function? You're an artist, right? Is there a real life or death function to art?
I would not say that there's a life or death function to art. No.
Right, and I say life or death in a kind of loose term, but it's not really like I'm staring at a piece of art right now. I don't know why it's in my house, but there's a piece of art here in my house. I'm glad it's here. I don't need it. Right. It's not really, I can't say in any way it's making my life better, it's necessary, but it still exists. And people have been doing art for 100,000 years. Right. Since humans could speak, there's been like pictures on cave walls that have survived to this day in Africa, where humans first evolved. So I don't think we need to I think we can have a sense of humor about it and just admit, look, a lot of this masculinity of ours is kind of obsolete. But I like it. It's fun. And I'm not prepared to emasculate myself. For the sake of what society wants. So I think there's a balancing point there.
Yeah.
When I read it.
I agree. Now I know we have to cut it short today, but I will say this. There's one of the things that I did, or one of the ways in which I think his overall premise throughout the book is relevant is this. The reason why those things are not necessary today is because technological advances have made it to where we don't need them. However, when things get bad, when life or death situations do come into play, morality, who's the nice man, becomes much less of an important feature than who is the one who's good at being a man, who gets shit done, who will ultimately make sure that the group survives. And there's a saying, and I might fuck it up, I'm going to try to get it right, but it's hard times make for strong men make for easy times make for soft men make for hard times, right? And if you find yourself in the wrong neighborhood, in certain cities, or you find yourself in a third world country, or you find yourself, getting mugged, you and your friends are getting robbed. In certain situations, when things are no longer being loosely held together by the social glue that we've kind of agreed upon, you want those type of guys there.
Agreed.
And if ever we find ourselves as a group of people needing those attributes, you want those things to still be there and present and functioning properly and exercised in the men who you're around. It's kind of one of those I'd rather be caught with it than without it things. Yeah. I may not need X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But if I ever do, I'd much rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think in that context, developing those attributes and coming to accept those attributes on a broader scale is important.
Yeah, and he did mention that this would come in handy when the zombies come.
Oh, absolutely.
So, so yeah, I 100%. I think we're on the same page. When the zombies come, you definitely want to have that in your back pocket. So everyone should go and train a little MMA, and maybe learn how to shoot a handgun or whatever you guys feel like doing. You roll with it.
Definitely. I would highly suggest, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate the book?
Even though I think there was flawed logic, I would, in terms of the enjoyability and some of the stories, and honestly the central message of the book, I'd probably give it a 7.58.
Okay. I'd probably somewhere between like an 8 or a 9.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I would highly suggest it. The Way of Men by Jack Donovan.